Hey, I'm Jeff Skversky. Today on Inside the Huddle, presented by Sportskeeda, I catch up with Pat Lenord of the New York Daily News. He's the Giants beat writer and NFL columnist. He's also a TV analyst in the New York area. He has worked for the news for more than a decade. He has spent the last 7 seasons covering the New York Giants, after 5 covering the New York Rangers. Leonard has great insight and information over the years on the Giants, who are beginning a new era with a new head coach. Yes, once again, they have a new head coach. We'll talk about that. Of course, Saquon Barkley, and could this be the final year for Daniel Jones under center in New York? That and more with Pat Lenord. Hey, Pat. So the one thing I always want to know is I love the back cover of the New York Daily News. Always great headlines. Do you ever get a chance to come up with any of those? I know you don't come up with the headlines per se, but do you ever suggest, hey, this would be a great back page?
That's a great question. Actually, part of the way I think I proved to some people at the Daily News that I could create an interesting idea of my own or put a sentence together was by sitting and working as an editor on the website about 10 years ago at the Daily News in the office and shouting out those kind of ideas. And the editors who were, I was just looking up to at the time, trying to soak up everything they knew, they were kind enough and professional enough to, if they heard an idea better than theirs over their right shoulder, 15 feet away from the guy who had just started, they'd whip around and say, that's pretty good. What's your name again? And so I did. I have some hanging up downstairs. There was one I was always proud of. I still haven't gotten the page framed yet, but it was Exit Sandman for when Mariano Rivera tore his knee up shagging fly balls. And
that was a good one. I remember that.
And so that was, it really is something about the back page and seeing your stamp on it that just never gets old.
No, I love it. I mean, they're always classic. They're so brilliantly written. I love it. Absolutely love it. And so you grew up in Philadelphia, but you're covering the Giants. So you grew up an Eagles fan, then all of a sudden you're covering the Giants. Does that ever get weird? I imagine that gets sometimes complicated. Maybe if you're dealing with the old timers, especially, like a Lawrence Taylor or something like that.
No, it's more complicated with the fans than anything, especially with the Giants in a downturn. If you're critical of them, you're an Eagles fan. If you praise them, everybody likes you. But no, I mean, growing up, the Daily News to me was the Philadelphia Daily News. That's the paper my dad read. Taking the subway to work, etc. And so working at the New York Daily News, even sometimes I hear it, I have to recalibrate. But I used to worship that back page. Now the New York one is mine. There will always be a part of me attached to Philadelphia. I still have the area code on my cell phone. But I went to Notre Dame, and when I was a student there, I covered the Notre Dame football team also for the student paper. And I had one Saturday I'd be in the stands. The next Saturday I'd be sitting in the press box with a shirt and tie. And I learned very young and very early how you have to compartmentalize and be objective and professional if you want to do this job. And so when I was covering hockey, I remember covering the Winter Classic at Citizens Bank Park, Rangers Flyers. And I remember almost reflecting during like the second intermission thinking, wow, I'm not a fan. I'm a reporter. It could have been any 2 teams on the ice. And it's because of practice, but also, like I said, you can't really do this objectively and professionally if you don't treat it as a job. And so, no pom-poms here for either way, but I do like to root for good individuals, and there'll always be a part of me in Philadelphia, but New York's my home now.
All right, let's talk about the fans. How white hot is the frustration from Giants fans? Just the way this team has been the last, you almost want to say 5-6 years now.
What they hate even more than losing is losing while the Eagles are winning, Jeff. Remember that.
Right.
Because it's the same way the other way. Though Philly is more, it's Dallas than anything. But it feels extra painful for the Giants franchise and the Giants fans that during this historic downturn for their franchise and the length of it as well, that the Eagles also finally squeezed out that Super Bowl and had some bragging rights as well. Frankly, listen, the Giants are a proud franchise, and the fan base similar to the Yankees, you want to look at them. They're a team that is just used to winning. And so the fact that they not only are losing, but losing every year, and really the Giants have been out of it by Halloween or Thanksgiving every year the last, 5, 6 years for the most part. And so irrelevance is even worse than losing. And that is where they have found themselves now on their third head coach in 5 years, and turning over the GM as well. And so really watching Howie Roseman and the Eagles reload and suddenly look again like they're dangerous and competing. Meanwhile, the Giants are just trying to figure out how to get a competitive roster. So there's a lot of pain in New York, and they don't even have the Jets to prop them up and be good while they're bad in the market. They're both horrible. They're the losingest franchise, tied for the worst record in the NFL, I believe, for the last 3 years. Maybe it's the last 5 as well. And so irrelevance is what they're trying to dig themselves out of. And obviously it starts with competing in the division.
Yeah, and you talk about just this carousel of head coaches. I believe it's 5 since 2017. And John Mara, the Giants owner, he said he wanted to hit the reset button with Joe Judge. How many times can he keep hitting that reset button? And now he's on a Brian Daboll. How much of a difference are we going to see here? There's been so much turnover. That cannot be good for the quarterback. It cannot be good for the team.
Yeah, well said. And the key is getting the GM position right. And Dave Gettleman staying on when they fired Pat Shurmur and hired Joe Judge, that basically was a poison pill to Joe Judge's entire tenure. And so even though John Mara promised a long leash for Joe Judge and promised to let him build it a certain way, that was an arranged marriage that never worked. And so they're hopeful now, not only that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, GM and head coach, have a like-minded vision they can take into the future, but forget the head coach for a second. The vision up on high from a young GM and Joe Schoen, who finally has his opportunity coming from Buffalo to put his own stamp on things, that has to work. That has to not only work on the field, but also you look at Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie and their relationship and the amount of that Lurie trusts Roseman. Roseman obviously has made some mistakes. You look at the draft and all, people can relitigate all that, but the winning the Super Bowl, that's what Joe Schoen needs to do, is not only create a better vision for the team on the field, but then also have the same vision that ownership has and carry it and be like-minded and aligned so that you can weather some storms and not have to just pull the plug because not only are you losing, but your foundation isn't there. And so I think the Giants' hope right now is to keep their word this time on it being a slow process that they're willing to stomach, because the fact of the matter is they are not going to be good in 2022. They hope to be a little bit better, but they're still not going to be a good team.
Well, how long is this going to take? I mean, it's been years. We just talked about it. And Daboll, look, he has that pedigree. He's won, I believe, a handful of Super Bowls as an assistant. He has a young offensive coordinator in Kafka, who's inexperienced as a play caller, really. And so what can we really expect? How long do you think this will really take for them to turn this around in New York?
Well, I think Shane, the GM's leash, might be longer than Daboll's, the coach's. And the reason I say that is because even though the Giants have to be realistic about what the season's going to be, John Mara, this is why they keep firing coaches, because they want to be patient, but they also want to win now. They're tired of losing because of all of it. So they want it to turn around. Right. They want it now. And so the problem right now is Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley right now, they're almost rental players. Like that, Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones are playing for a contract, are playing for their Giants futures. And neither player, as we sit here at this moment, looks long for this team, because unless they both knock it out of the park and stay healthy, you can't say with a straight face confidently that Daniel Jones is going to get a contract extension. And really, you just can't say confidently in general that Joe Schoen is going to invest money as kind of a newer age GM in a running back in Saquon Barkley, who has had a long injury history and a short career. So the fact of the matter is they have a lot of incentive to perform now. And so the Giants are hoping, and they've kind of patchworked the offensive line with some veterans to try and kick it up a notch quickly. But the more realistic approach to this is that it's going to take at least until next year, when they're probably going to end up drafting a quarterback, to start showing some signs of what they're going to be in the future. I frankly think it's going to be year 3 before Shane and either Daboll or whoever the coach is after him for them to really start showing themselves as an NFC East contender in the likes of what the Cowboys and the Eagles are right now.
The way you're touching on that there, do you see a scenario where maybe Jones and or Saquon Barkley are traded this year?
I think it's possible that Saquon, if the team starts falling out early, like they have pretty much every year recently, there's no question in my mind that a Barkley trade could happen during the season. Yes, absolutely. Especially if, there's also, like there is now, there's not much of a sense that the Giants are aching to put a ton of money into the running back position. So, because that was part of what Dave Gettleman did, is invested too much in that position that's tenuous. So Daniel Jones, though, I don't think he has much trade value at this point. I think people know what he is. I think a lot of teams have respect for him as a guy who can come in and play in the NFL, but I don't think a lot of people right now respect him as a guy who can carry a team. So I think it would be hard to get trade for a value for him. I do think a guy like Barkley would be available, though, if the Giants falter.
So when you look at those two now under Dable, I mean, he's a brilliant offensive mind. That's why Morrow wanted to bring him into the New York Giants. What do you think he can do with those two key players on offense? What have you seen so far as we head into training camp?
Jeff, the most interesting part of the Barkley-Jones dynamic in Dable's offense we've seen already is Barkley looks like he's actually going to play more receiver than running back.
Yeah, he's like lining up in the slot, right? A lot?
Yes, or starting in the backfield, but then immediately going out wide in motion. You're going to see a little bit more of that, kind of like what the Chiefs do. So Mike Kafka bring in a little bit of that as well. But I actually think compared to the Joe Judge, Jason Garrett Giants, you're going to see a lot less extra, 6 offensive linemen or 2 tight end sets and more 4 wide, right? And it might not be 4 wide receivers. It might be 3 wide receivers and Saquon. And then they have more gadget guys now like Wan'Dale Robinson. They have Kadarius Toney still on the roster as of this moment, guys who can carry the ball, who you can put it in their hands, and they can do more than catch it on a slant. And so the emphasis so far on Barkley has been that we've seen get him the ball in space and let him operate. And frankly, Jeff, that's what he's better at compared to he can't pass block. He's tried. Joe Judge tried to teach him how to do it. He's not good at it. He's bad at it. He's not a prototypical running back. So I think you're going to see some attempts at creativity. But let me just say this. Other people have tried some of this stuff. I mean, Barkley had Pat Shurmur sent him out wide on a wheel route in Chicago in a game they should have won a couple years ago, and he's wide open. It was a great call in the first half, and the ball was in the breadbasket, and Barkley dropped it. So it's a little bit on these guys to stay healthy and perform as well.
Yeah, health, of course, been an issue with Barkley. I mean, he's had all sorts of issues. By all accounts, going into camp, he's in amazing shape. He's healthy finally. He seems trying to have that breakout year that he hasn't had since his rookie season.
Yeah, and, the question now is the offensive line, as it always is with the Giants. I mean, if you want to look at the defining difference between the Eagles and the Giants over the last several years, aside from the wins and the success, it's the lines. It's the investment, especially in the offensive line. The Eagles have a good one every year. The Giants have a bad one every year. The Cowboys have a good one every year. And look at how the division shakes out. I mean, really, that's really what it boils down to. What the Giants stand now is they have Andrew Thomas, left tackle, first-round pick, and Evan Neal, a rookie, right tackle, first-round pick. Thomas is coming off another surgery, second ankle surgery in 2 years, but is supposed to be healthy come the season. Jeff, if those 2 tackles are healthy and play well, you might see the best Giants offensive line that we've seen really since their last Super Bowl in 2011. And if that's the case, again, not guaranteeing that's going to happen because the interior is still a question mark. But if they are even base level average, then hey, Barkley and Daniel Jones might show us some things that we haven't seen in a while, if ever.
What do you think we will see from Jones? I mean, he's been a guy who's drafted high. Really, in that draft class, wasn't a lot of great quarterbacks. He's taken maybe the future passer, franchise quarterback for the Giants, but he is not really taking the reins there. Now, all the turnovers at head coach has hurt him. Let's be honest. Of course, that offensive line can be blamed as well. What can we expect from Daniel Jones, you think, this upcoming season?
I think what you can expect from him is an emphasis on getting in the end zone. And that sounds so obvious for a bad offense. But what I mean by that is, and you'll know what I'm talking about, whether it's the Eagles, the Buccaneers, the Saints, or, the Rams, any team that has been scoring more points of late, the Bills, these teams still turn the ball over. They just, the next possession, go down and they get 7 points, not 3. And what the Giants have been doing is moving the ball okay between the 20s at times when Daniel Jones has been their quarterback. But when they get into the red zone, everything stalls. They freeze. The field shrinks. They can't punch it in. Combine that with some turnovers, and you get a team that's scoring 10, 12, 18, 15 points a game. Daniel Jones's emphasis this year is going to be to push the ball down the field in Brian Daboll's offense. Now, the scary thing, if you're a Giants fan looking at kind of camp and OTAs, was you saw a lot of horizontal concepts. So all the stuff I'm talking about with Barkley moving out wide, Wandale Robinson, Kadarius, these gadget players, you're seeing a lot of things horizontal, but still not a lot of success pushing the ball down the field. But that's where they have to go. And Brian Daboll said himself, during camp and during the summer, he wants Jones to take chances and feel comfortable making these higher risk, higher reward throws to know what works in this new offense. But he's going to have to make those throws. And I think what you're going to see, Jeff, is Daniel's going to let it rip, for better or worse. So I think you're going to see more chances. I think you're going to see a more exciting looking offense. And then the question is whether or not everything comes together and the receivers stay healthy and he makes the throws.
Obviously, Daboll has that relationship with the GM. They go back to their days in Buffalo, and whether they did or not, maybe Daboll was always the guy. But Brian Flores raised a huge concern during this whole process that came out with Bill Belichick involved. Was Brian Flores ever a serious candidate for that job, or was it always Daboll?
Oh, good question. So Brian Flores was a serious candidate for this job. And
was it a sham interview? He's claiming it's a sham interview. I mean, from all the work you've done and everything you know, was it a sham interview, or was he a serious candidate?
So, okay. So I can understand why he thinks it was a sham interview based on the timeline of that week. I'll tell you this, Jeff. Here's what I know. The week of all the coaching interviews before Daboll was named head coach on Friday, as of that Wednesday, I believe Flores' interview was it Monday or Tuesday of that week? That Wednesday, I had several people I trust in the league, high-level sources, telling me they were hearing that Daboll was a leading contender to land the Dolphins job because he was a candidate there as well.
Right.
From everything I understand, at that moment, that Wednesday, it was possible that Daboll was going to Miami or wanted Miami, and that Flores was going to get the Giants job. Something happened in between, Wednesday morning and Thursday morning, where it then became clear that the Dolphins were continuing their search, and that the Giants had zeroed in on Daboll. If anything, Jeff, I think the sham interview was Leslie Frazier's second interview on Friday, because Brian Daboll was announced as their head coach that afternoon, not long after Brian Daboll, or not long after Leslie Frazier, a black coach as well, had walked out of the Giants facility for his first in-person interview, but second head coaching interview. So I find it hard to believe that the Giants didn't know that afternoon they were leaning to Daboll already when Leslie came in. I do know Joe Shane's connections to the Dolphins organization and front office played a huge role in them ultimately going Daboll. I know that there were members of the Giants front office and ownership who very much did want Brian Flores as a significant contender and their head coach early in the process. I know I talked to a lot of people during that week. It was not made clear to me by anybody during that week that Flores was just being used as a sham interview, as a minority candidate to get to their end game of Daboll. But certainly when you piece it all together and you read the allegations in the lawsuit from Brian and you read the Bill Belichick alleged texts, it's hard to come to any other conclusion And it's hard to look at Brian Flores and call him a liar about that allegation when it did play out the way that he alleges.
Right. And but look, when you play devil's advocate, and I don't know the inside what went on, but when you play devil's advocate, if you and I are going for the same job, and let's say they bring me in first, but you're truly the guy that they think is the favorite, it's not that much different. And I'm not saying I know anything about the Giants situation and Brian Flores and Brian Dable and things like that, but you don't always bring in your favorite candidate or your top candidate first. Sometimes you're also at the end going, hey, he's still our leading candidate, but let's just do our due diligence and make sure that this guy over here doesn't beat this guy out. I mean, isn't that just the process of an interview in any field?
Yes. It was also a little bit interesting and strange because of all the so-called complaints they had about Joe Judge, the Belichick guy, to then have Brian Flores suddenly be a strong candidate when he's no nonsense, making guys run laps, all these things supposedly that they didn't like about Joe Judge all of a sudden. And now they're also hiring Brian Dable, a Bill Belichick guy. So a little bit of that didn't add up. I mean, Jeff, I will say this. It rings a little hollow to me when you tell me you interviewed like 9 or 18 people for something, but in the GM and head coach searches, both of your hires were the first guy you talked to. I mean, listen, these people, these GMs, these owners, they make their lists way in advance of these searches. And so in December and November, there's a pretty good idea of who they're eyeing up by that point anyway. And listen, they own the teams, they run the teams. That's how you have to operate as a business. And if you're doing your homework, you're going to start to develop favorites, people you're interested in talking to. But I will say that based on how quickly it went from Flores as a strong candidate to, and then Leslie Frazier sitting in there when Dable clearly was their guy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was a sham, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that something isn't fishy about it either.
Right. And look, every single time these guys have interviews, it's a hard decision, but you're right to the point of the GMs, they have a list right now. And the Giants GM, trust me, he has a list going, if this doesn't work out, who are my first few phone calls to figure things out if things become a disaster in New York? It's just the way these GMs and these teams in all of these leagues operate. So let's talk about the Giants back on the field. Draft 2 guys in the top 10, for the first time in team history, right? How much an impact could those first round picks have?
I think Evan Neal, the right tackle, even though Thibodeau was taken before him, I think Neal more immediately you look at the possibility of having strong bookend tackles for the first time in a long time. That could pay immediate dividends. He's a mountain of a man. There were teams who had injury concerns about him going back to his medicals. The Giants felt okay with it. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But a strong character guy and somebody who can impact things immediately, he will start. And then Thibodeau on the defensive end, he's interesting. He'll definitely be a big personality in New York. He'll be fun to cover. I think that Don Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator, he loves to throw numbers at the quarterback. So we might not see, 11, 12, 13 sacks from Thibodeau, but he will be rushing. And if he's one of 6 or 7 or 8 guys rushing the quarterback, Martindale's scheme is designed for one of them to come free on any given play. So sometimes it might be the slot corner, it might be your strong safety, it might be your edge. So I think sometimes he's going to have to learn to kind of take a body, be the sacrifice on a block to open up something else for somebody else. And as long as he plays that role, I think he'll get his. Listen, these premier positions, pass rusher, outside corner, tackle, quarterback, these are places where the Giants haven't had a stud for a while, right? An absolute lockdown stud. And so if these guys can become someone reliable that they can count on immediately, you don't want to put too much pressure on guys right away, but they're going to need them to step up because they're both going to be starting. And that's how the Giants could turn this around maybe a little bit quicker than people like I believe they can.
Yeah, I mean, obviously building through the draft is the key to every single franchise. You have to have some luck and, obviously know how to pick talent. Salary cap has been an issue in New York. And so is there any room for them to make any moves, or just because where they're at as far as rebuilding, they wouldn't do anything in free agency?
They've got nothing left other than extremely affordable and low priced, like late summer signings. I mean,
How's
like
that possible? How's that possible when you're that bad? I mean,
no, that's a great question. Well, that's why they are so historically bad. And it comes down to last year, going into last season, them misidentifying and miscalculating who they were as a team. And like one thing I always tell people about the Rams that I like about them, going back like 3 years ago, at some point they looked at their roster there and they said, "Hey, we can win, and we're gonna put our resources and dedicate our resources and act like we're a good team, because we are, and we're gonna get over the hump. But we know we have to improve X, Y, Z." Because they self-evaluated and they say we're good, right? And so you look at the Giants right now, or going back to last year, the Giants, they went 6-10. Right? The Eagles tanked that last game. The Giants don't get in. They clearly think they're better than they are. And they say to themselves, we can win this division. This division stinks. We only had 6 wins, but we can add some pieces and we can win. So they were wrong. They weren't a good team. They were better defensively, but they weren't good. Their roster wasn't good. Well, that's how you get into the position they are now, by starting to hand out big contracts and committing money into the future to kick the can down the road, to Leonard Williams resigning, signing Kenny Galladay, signing Adoree Jackson, and all the way down the line. So what happens is you're locked into an injury-prone, expensive roster with no wins. And that's why they're kind of up against it all. Now, Judge did something impressive when he first got here. He found Logan Ryan, a guy who went back to New England off the scrap heap at the end of that first summer, going into the lockdown pandemic season of 2020. And Ryan basically played for pennies on that year and helped the defense before they paid him that December. If the Giants make an addition during the summer, it'll have to be something like that. A guy who has no other market or leverage, who's willing to take a chance on behalf of the GM or coach. But I mean, Jeff, their roster is built for the future, because any money they handed out this year, outside of Mark Lewinsky, the right guard who they signed from Indianapolis, and Tyrod Taylor, who's on a 2-year deal as a backup quarterback and maybe bridge after Jones leaves, they only sign guys to 1-year deals pretty much throughout their roster. So you and I know what that means. That means we don't expect any of these guys to be here next year, and we're building for the future and not now. So that's where they are.
Well, here's a wild idea. What if they can pull off a trade for a Jimmy Garoppolo, and all of a sudden you have Daniel Jones as your backup, and you have an experienced, talented quarterback in Garoppolo, who the 49ers may go, okay, sure, we'll move. I don't know if the Giants even have that desire or the capital to make that happen. But next thing you know, the Giants could be more of a contender in the NFC East.
No, that's a fair idea. I mean, it would have to be very cheap on both the money front and the cost to acquire him front. And I'm pretty sure Jimmy G comes with some money on his contract at the moment. Like, I think it would be too rich for them, and they wouldn't have enough to get off of their roster that San Francisco would want, combined with he's coming off the shoulder surgery. And the Giants right now are basically like leaning away from any kind of injury issue. I mean, half their roster was on the sidelines in red jerseys throughout the spring. So those two combinations, while your thought is good about upgrading the QB position, I don't think a lot of those factors line up for them in the short term. And especially, you could also make the argument, devil's advocate against that would be, well, why would you try to upgrade a quarterback when the rest of your roster stinks and you still will be bad? So, obviously that's not how these owners think. They always want to win every year, which, to your point, you're always trying to upgrade. But at the moment, the Giants are trying to take less on and offload more, because like you said, how the heck did they even get in this position where they can't trade for an upgraded quarterback because his salary is a little too expensive? But that's where they are. And that's the one area you can sympathize with Joe Schoen on at the moment is Dave Gettleman didn't know what he was doing, managing the money. And obviously it was a team effort with Kevin Abrams and Joe Judge and on down the line. But now they're really trying to clean up that mess. And you know it firsthand, everybody in Philadelphia, James Bradbury's on the Eagles for 2 reasons. One, the new regime didn't respect his talents as much as the last regime. But the other was because when they went on their budget ledger and they said, well, who's costing us a lot and how much can we save a lot if we get rid of these guys, he was one of the names on the top of the list.
Sure.
And so, I promise you that is going to benefit the Eagles and hurt the Giants this year. He is a very good player and a fun guy to cover too. You'll enjoy him.
Yeah, he seems great. And so Pat Lenord, I appreciate you joining me. Always a great read in the New York Daily News, a great follow on Twitter. Tell us where we can find you.
Well, yeah, on Twitter at PLeonardNYDN, and then on Instagram and TikTok, PL on NFL. A lot of content there. I do live Q&As on both of them as well, and might have a new podcast coming out soon for the 2022 season as well. So keep an eye on that as well, maybe either during camp or at least very much for week 1 of the season. So
I appreciate it. The best in the business covering the New York Giants in New York. We won't let anyone know that you grew up an Eagles fan. That's all water under the bridge.
Appreciate that, Jeff. Yeah, keep it under your hat.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Pat. That was Pat Lenord of the New York Daily News. Great insight there. If you like the show, click on the subscribe button, bottom of your screen. Also, if you hit the bell button on YouTube, I'll send you an alert when we drop the next episode. You can also listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all your favorite podcast apps. Click on the links in the description below. Thanks for watching and listening. Next time, we'll have another episode for you. I'm Jeff Skversky on Inside the Huddle, presented by Sportskeeda.